Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena. This week it's time to prepare for a blistering hot summer on the east coast of the US. It's time to install air conditioning. My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the top sides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure. In this video I'll be installing one of Dometic's spiffy DTG 16 units, and in the spirit of full transparency I should mention that the kit you see here was provided to me free of charge by Dometic. This is everything that came with the kit. There's the DTG 16 itself, complete with electrical box. Then there is a bit of soundproofing to go over the compressor. There is the ducting. There's the 7, the 6, and the 4-inch ducting. There are vents for those. There's a big Y to connect the ducting together. Then there's a pump for the seawater. There's a smart start and a little touch display. There are a couple of cool features about the DTG units. The G stands for global. Dometic named it that way because while the unit is single voltage, in our case 230 volts, the unit will run off of both 50 and 60 hertz. That's important because while here aboard Athena we have an isolation transformer that'll step 110 volts up to 230 volts, that isolation transformer in no way alters the frequency. So if you want to take your air conditioning long distance cruising, this is definitely something you need to pay attention to, because a lot of air conditioning units out there don't support both 50 and 60 hertz. An isolation transformer is a great idea aboard a sailboat, but in case you don't want to install one of those, but you still want to bring your air conditioning long distance cruising, Dometic is about to launch some new variable output units. I think they said they're going to launch them in August, and those units I believe are both dual voltage and dual frequency, while also being quieter and more energy efficient. While we're on the topic of powering the anti-perspiration device, you might want to add one of these. This is a smart start. This is also known as a soft starter. If we take a quick look at the specs for our unit, you can see that the starting current max is 62 amps. The Smart Start reduces that startup peak by up to 65%. That is going to be a huge quality of life improvement for your genset or your inverter. A quick little side note about those variable output units I mentioned Dometic about to launch. They don't need one of these soft start doohickeys because they don't have that same startup peak. But for something like the DTG 16, this is definitely a good idea. Another cool thing about the DTG units is that the drip pan here, which catches any condensation that might drip off of the unit, is made out of composite, not metal, so this won't rust or corrode. Also, this guy right here, which is where you connect your ducting to get the cold air out, he can rotate so that you can optimize the installation of this guy so you're not wasting a bunch of space. I'm 99% sure I'm going to install this unit in our hanging locker in the forward cabin. That's only a few feet away from the V-berth where we sleep. And for an installation like that, it might be a good idea to consider this guy. This is a bit of soundproofing that goes over the compressor. I'm gonna hold off on installing this guy until I've done a dry fit of the unit, but apparently this reduces the noise level by up to 50%. The vents are available in multiple colors. I think maybe I got 2 different colors by accident, or maybe Dometic just wanted to show off 2 of the color choices. But yeah, either way, this is perfectly fine with me. There were also some things that were not included with the kit. I've gone out and I've found some 3/4 inch hose, 1/2 inch hose, some 4 square millimeter cable, a sea strainer, a through hole for the overboard discharge, and a small mountain of hose clamps. Unfortunately, with me being stuck in the Cape Verde Islands now, something like a sea strainer is impossible to get. So Ava's going to be bringing one of those from the US when she flies over. Now let me plow through the manuals one last time and then we can start installing the unit. The installation manual here is very straightforward. There are a couple of really good illustrations in it that helps you understand how everything is supposed to be connected. Now, the instructions are very straightforward and simple, but of course there is nothing simple about running ducting, cables, or hoses inside of a boat. It's always going to be cramped and awkward, but at least the instructions are easy to understand. I've emptied everything out of our hanging locker here, and I've grabbed a couple of quick measurements off of the unit. My plan is to install it here on the bottom shelf. Now, unfortunately, that shelf is about 2 centimeters too high, so we'll have to lower that a little bit. Please excuse the mess in here. I have a bunch of cable management to do in here, but like I said, the plan is to put the unit down here, have the 7-inch ducting go up behind these shelves here up to the Y, have the 6-inch ducting go to the saloon, and then have the 4-inch ducting go to the forward cabin. That'll allow me to put the vent for the 4-inch ducting maybe up here or down here. I sadly don't think there's enough room here in the middle. That would have been great, but yeah, one of those two places should work. As far as the vent for the 6-inch ducting, that is going to go up on the main bulkhead here, somewhere outboard of our barometer. Now, we're going to be using the unit mainly for cooling. It will also do heating, but we're mainly going to be using it for cooling, in which case it's ideal to have the vents up high. I've figured out almost everything about the installation. I know where I want to place the unit, how I want to run the ducting, how I want to run the hose with the salt water to the unit, how I want to run the 4 square millimeter cable I showed you to the unit, also where I want to put the sea strainer, the pump, stuff like that. There's only really one thing I haven't really figured out yet, and that is how to get air to the unit. The unit works by drawing in air, cooling that, and then spitting it back out again. So of course we have to be able to supply air to the thing, and here in the instructions there are some minimum requirements for what's called the return air, which is the air that comes back to the unit that needs to be cooled down before it's then spit back out again. Looking at this table for the 16,000 BTU unit, we can see that the minimum return air grill should be 200 square inches or 1290 square centimeters. That would take up about the width of the plywood in the door here and about 30 centimeters of the height. So we've got plenty of room here for the return air. Satisfied that the location would indeed work, I removed the bottom shelf in the hanging locker and got set up in the cockpit. Fortunately, I had tons of wood left over from last week's woodworking project, so lowering the shelf was going to be easy. I glued and screwed the new supports in place and decided to add some extra strength to the shelf. The air conditioning unit is not super heavy, but it's only 12mm plywood. With the shelf back in place, it was time for the first test fit. That showed me where I needed to modify the 2 other shelves to be able to run the ducting. I added more pieces of hardwood so I can protect the ducting from getting crushed or smushed. With the shelves modified, I moved on to the vents. I'll place the bigger vent in the saloon as it's the bigger area. This is also where we cook, and also it's a little bit less insulated than the forward cabin. There is nothing worse than things that rattle when you're underway, so I used a tiny dab of Sikaflex on the vent along with a couple of screws. Happy with the saloon, I turned my attention to the vent in the forward cabin and repeated the process. The last hole I needed to make in the locker was for the 4-inch ducting. The outer diameter is more like 6 inches or 15 centimeters, and I didn't have a hole saw that was big enough. But I drilled 4 holes with a smaller hole saw and then removed the pointy bits in between the holes to still have a nice looking hole. The hole I just drilled sits about 30 centimeters, that's about yay much below the chain plate for our lower forward shrouds. Now, I'm not worried about the load from the lower forward shrouds, that's going to be fine. But I don't want those chain plates to start leaking and then water running down and getting into that big hole and start rotting the plywood. I have some epoxy here. A couple of coats of this stuff will do a great job of sealing up those exposed plywood edges. But before I start getting everything sticky and limiting what I can do, I would like to run the hose and the cable and everything back there and also install this little display. This is the Smart Touch cabin control display, and this guy will allow us to not only set the desired temperature, but also do a little bit of scheduling, some configuration and some other stuff. I'm really excited to take him for a spin. The display came with 30 feet or 9 meters of this cable. Now 30 feet is not quite enough to get from the unit underneath the cabin sole and all the way to the nav station area. But even if it was long enough, I don't think I want to install the little display at the nav station, because in the nav station we have tons of electronics and it actually gets pretty toasty in there, and I'm afraid that would mess up the little temperature sensor on the display. According to the manual, you can get an optional inside air temperature sensor, so you're not relying on the little guy on the display. But yeah, I don't have that, and also the cable isn't quite long enough to get to the nav station. After much head scratching, I have decided to install the little display up here. That is going to be out of direct sunlight. It's going to be away from anything that's going to produce a significant amount of heat. So yeah, I think this is a good spot for it. The manual does mention to install the display a little bit above mid-level in the boat. Now in the forward cabin he's pretty much at head level, but there is a step going down there, so for the saloon I think he's pretty well positioned. I removed the access panel to the secret little compartment and made a quick little template for cutting the hole. The oscillating multi-tool made short work of the 12mm plywood. The display is held in place with 4 screws. Now for the only part of this project I've been dreading, running the hoses and the cable. I swear if I ever refit another boat, it'll have conduit that can fit a medium-sized car. Anywho, this is 3/4 inch hose for getting raw water to the air conditioning unit. The black cable here is the 4 square millimeter cable I showed you earlier. Sadly, I was not able to find a tin cable here on the island. What could possibly be so bad about running a little bit of hose and some cable? Nothing, except for the fact that I'm fast running out of space for hoses and cable. To run the cable and the hose from the bilge to the head, I will need a mousing line. I taped a thin red Dyneema line to a 1-meter ruler and shoved it in under the cabin sole. After a little bit of jiggling, I could reach the red line under the vanity. The line is only taped on with some electrical tape, so it's easy to retract the ruler and remove the tape. That was the trickiest part of the run. From there on, it was just a matter of going under the vanity, into the settee, continue under the settee before then going through the main bulkhead and ending up in the hanging locker. To get the cable from the bilge to the distribution panel, I again busted out Mr. Ruler. It might not look that far on video, but there is no way I can reach the end by hand. After yet more fiddling, I finally got the cable pulled through. We've just about reached the end of the day, and I am pretty pooped, so I'm not going to be doing much more aboard the boat today, which means it is the perfect time to get those plywood edges sealed. It is delightfully warm here, so I should be able to get on a couple of coats before it's bedtime. I don't have much epoxy left, but that's okay. We only need a tiny little bit. I would much have preferred to do this with primer and paint to have a neat looking hole, but yeah, I don't have any and I can't find any here on the island, so for now it's epoxy. That's the first coat done. So far, so good. It's a full 48 hours later now. I got derailed by some immigration/visa stuff here in the Cape Verde Islands. But the good news is I have 3 coats of epoxy on those exposed plywood edges, so they're now thoroughly sealed. And that means we can start messing around with the ducting. This is the 4-inch ducting. I opened it up so I could measure the outside diameter before I started drilling holes. Now, of course, it would suck to have condensation on the outside of this because the air inside of it is cold and the outside is humid and hot, and that is why it's insulated. So there's the inner ducting bit here, then there's insulation, and then this outer stuff here, which kind of feels like a mylar. Touching this stuff brings back fond memories of insulating the attic in my old house. I will say, from the little bit I've handled this, I haven't gotten itchy, so maybe it's different from the attic stuff, but yeah, it kind of feels the same way. Now the ducting is going to connect to these black boxes here, and what's actually going to connect the ducting to the black box is this little flange thing here, and I'm assuming the reason why there are no holes in the box here is so that you can choose if you want it on the bottom here or on the back. I've given this a little bit of a go here, and it's going to be a tight squeeze to get the inside part of the ducting here onto the flange. So I think I'm definitely better off trying to do this before I mount the black boxes behind the vents. I trimmed the edge of the ducting as there seemed to be a lot of extra insulation there and got the flange smushed on there. I used a little bit of duct tape to secure the flange and then some aluminum tape to secure the outside cover to the flange. After having grabbed a quick couple of measurements, I transferred those onto the black box and proceeded to cut a hole where the flange will attach. After a light bit of sanding, I secured the flange to the box using a few screws. Armed with my freshly assembled ducting, I headed into the hanging locker and ran it through the new hole. With the black box secured, I was finally able to mount the vent. I think the result looks very nice. I repeated the process for the 6-inch ducting, the box and the flange. It did start getting a little bit cramped in the hanging locker, but I was able to get everything connected and finally got the top shelf reinstalled. We've lost a little bit of storage space, but I think it'll be well worth it. So far, so good. The ducting is in place. There is still a lot more I need to do. I need to fit the or install the through hole for the overboard discharge. I need to get everything wired up. I need to install the sea strainer, and yeah, we also need to install the soft start here, the smart start. Yeah, so there is quite a lot left on the to-do list. Like I mentioned earlier, Ava is bringing a bunch of stuff. I need to finish the installation and get everything up and running. And she's been delayed a little bit, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to make this a two-part video. Both because of the stuff Ava is bringing, but also because the overboard discharge, I'd like to have that as close to the waterline as possible. But the boat is in the water, so putting in that through hull is definitely going to be a two-person job. So yeah, sorry about the cliffhanger, guys, but this is going to have to be a two-parter. So yeah, I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more glorious air conditioning fun, and hopefully we'll be able to get the unit up and running. So yeah, as always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!